Good morning. It was very difficult for me to decide a particular aspect of my presentation regarding the theme of the conference today and tomorrow. Then that means my presentation is not so detailed, but I'd just like to present a general picture or broad idea about how international data transfers are dealt with internationally. I found, or my understanding of cloud computing and big data is a international transfer of data between countries. So I like to present from the cloud computing at a glance until to the last of the international efforts to harmonize the rules of international data transfers. The second one, next one, please. Okay, my understanding of cloud computing is and has two elements. First, the global delivery of cloud services, but at the same time, the national regulation of data protection. Although in the EU, there is a kind of unified legal system of data protection, and also in the APEC, there is the kind of data protection of privacy framework, but nevertheless, still, those countries, each country has its own legal system over data protection. So while cloud computing should go across the borders of the world, but those movements or those businesses are still restricted by the national boundaries of the legal system. Next one. And there are certain many key factors, but for the purpose of my presentation, at least there are three key factors to promote cloud computing services. First, free trade or free digital trade. Second one is data protection. And third one, ultimately, from the perspective of law, the international harmonization of rules. Next one, please. Cloud computing is regarded as a new phenomenon, so there might be a concern about what rule to be applied to this new business of cloud computing. But generally speaking, there are certain rules already applicable even to cloud computing, and there are certain principles shared by many countries. One of them is security of mediation. That is, data controllers and processors should apply appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect data against accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, disclosure, and other unlawful processing. The second one is purpose limitation. Data controllers should process personal data for purposes compatible with those for which it was initially collected. However, as we discussed in the first session, data move around the source. So there might be uncertainties from these special characteristics of cloud computing, but nevertheless, the basic principles should apply to cloud computing. And next, please. Also, cloud computing entails many of the same considerations as outsourcing from offshore vendors. Cloud providers, as data processors, process data on behalf of cloud customers as data controllers, such as government, corporate, individual users. Although cloud providers handle customers' data, cloud customers retain responsibility for compliance with data protection overall. However, outsourcing chain may involve multiple cloud providers and subcontractors, and that means multiple jurisdictions of the world. next and next. Next. Now I'd like to move into the cloud computing in trade context. Trade is governed by the World Trade Organization, and World Trade Organization has three distinctive systems of rules. First, trading goods, that is governed by the GATT, and trading services governed by the GATS, and intellectual property rights governed by the TRIPS. And cloud computing may belong to trading services under the GATS, but at the moment, no member of the WTO commits to the cloud computing per se. Nevertheless, there is a sector of computer and related services. Next, please. And for the classification of services, there is a UN system, although it is quite old. And Division 84 is regarding computer and related services, and Division 843 is regarding data processing services. But it is still unclear whether Division 843 or together and CPC 84 is applicable to cloud computing. So in 2007, some WTO members, including the US and Japan and not Korea, suggested a proposal saying that CPC 84 is to cover all computer and related services regardless of whether they are delivered via a network, including the internet. However, this proposal had not been and was not accepted in the WTO. However, as we all understand, the US and the EU, those developed countries, have been trying to do this in other ways. First, the US and EU in 2011 agreed on trade principles for ICT. Next, please. Also, next, please. Yes. And they agreed to the trade principles for ICT services, and they adopted 10 principles, and number 3 is cross-border information flows. So saying that governments should not prevent service suppliers of other countries or customers of those suppliers from electronically transferring information internally or across borders, accessing public available information or accessing their own information stored in other countries. And the EU and the US agreed between themselves these trade principles should be applied between the two parties, the EU and the US, and also they agreed to apply these principles toward the relations with other countries, I think including Korea and Japan. But nevertheless, the US and EU agreed that there should be a protection of privacy at the same time. Next, please. And then the US has started to discuss the digital trade. So this year, I think in July, the US ITC will provide a report on digital trade, and this work was initiated, ordered by the US Senate Committee on Finance. And according to them, digital trade is to cover commerce in products and services delivered over digital networks. And digital trade includes software and services such as data processing and holding. I think that is very similar to cloud computing. And the Finance Committee stated that policymakers are facing unprecedented challenges as they seek to ensure that digital trade remains open while producers and consumers' data remain secure. Next, please. And then certain WTO members, including US, EU, Japan, and Korea, they call themselves as really good friends of services. They started negotiations on so-called International Services Agreement in the WTO. And that negotiation is to produce that agreement covering new areas such as computer-related services and cross-border data transfer. And they agreed that the starting point for negotiations is the most ambitious market opening agreement made by participating countries. For example, in respect of the US, that is the Korea-US FTA's service provisions. Now, let's move into Korea-EU FTA and Korea-US FTA. Korea-EU FTA is a bilateral agreement, and it provides CPC 84. As I explained, the CPC 84 was not agreed in the WTO, but bilaterally between Korea and EU, they agreed. It should be computer and read services, and that covers data processing and storage, and also computer and read services includes the internet, and that includes all services that provide, say, data processing, data storage. So that is very similar to cloud computing. And Korea, I'd like to move next, and next, and next. Now I'd like to move to Korea. How many minutes do I have? 10? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Then I'd like to move to Korea, because there is an FTA, bilateral FTA between Korea and EU, bilateral FTA between Korea and the US. And these two parties, respectively, agreed on the financial services, including international transfer of financial information, including personal data. So Korea is obligated to implement the provisions as provided in the FTA with EU and with the US. And next. Okay. So last month, Korean government proposed a regulation called Regulation on Outsourcing of Information Processing and IT Facilities of Financial Companies. And that should be materialized next month. So under the regulation, financial companies established in Korea are now allowed to transfer the financial information to outside of Korea. It has been not so, but only due to the commitment under the FTA. So you see that multilaterally in the WTO, there was no success about the cloud computing, about computer and read services, but bilaterally, for example, between Korea and US, Korea and EU, this international flow of data, in this case, financial information, is now allowed, is now obligated. I'll skip the explanation on the Korean regulation, so I skip until the international effort to harmonize international data transfer. So please move. Okay. Then now I want to come back to the data protection side. In the EU, there is the system of so-called binding corporate rules for international international transport data. And also in the APEC, there is the so-called cross-border privacy rules system for international transport data. I'm not going to, in detail about these two systems, but I'd like to share with you. There is a harmonization of the regimes and rules over the international transport data internally in the EU, internally in the APEC. But there is a very interesting movement. Could you move to next, next. Okay, no, the previous one, please. Okay. Only this year, PCR and CBPR committee was established between the EU and the APEC. So as I said, there is a harmonization in the EU and in the APEC, but now the two regions in terms, in the context of data protection, they are now about to harmonize between the two regions. And next, and at the same time, in the countries of French-speaking, French-speaking countries, they have been trying to have their own system of the data protection. So, I'm going to finalize my presentation. That is, international transport data has been valued in the context of data protection and privacy. But very recently, with the initiation of the US and EU, international transport data has been inside the trade issues. I think it is a positive movement in that, in addition to the four elements of economy, goods, services, people, and payment, there should be a free flow of those four elements. But now, the world is looking at another free movement of data. So I think free movement of data or international transport data is regarded another incentive, or as such, it is another an element for the growth of world economy. But at the same time, there is to be a balance between the free flow of information and at the same time protection of privacy, protection of data. So I think international transport data should be approached in many different areas. Data protection as such, trade as such. And as such, there should be an international cooperation. That's why we are here to discuss those matters.